Hello and welcome, everyone. Here we are together for another interview on the Intentional Parenting Summit. I'm Dinah Yoakley, your co-host and founder of Delight in Parenting, and I'm really delighted to have here with me Heidi Garcia. Welcome, Heidi. So glad to have you here today.
Hello.
Yeah, so Heidi is a mother of two, a former big law litigator and neurospicy owner of a highly sensitive nervous system. Heidi found it very hard to put all the wonderful things she was learning about peaceful parenting into practice when her oldest was a toddler. This started to shift when she really committed to meditation, and that led her down this path of supporting parents to better support themselves and their children, not only in the difficult moments, but all of the time, so that everyone's windows of tolerance grow and the difficult times become both less frequent and less intense. I love that. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. So, welcome,
Yes,
Heidi. I'm so delighted to have you.
nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Today we're in terms of intentional parenting. I really love your work around showing up as a more intentional parent and the resources and the frameworks that you bring to the table. So today we're talking about supporting the parent-child relationship with mindfulness and meditation. So maybe you can kick us off with a little bit about, what are mindfulness and meditation and how are they interrelated? How are they different?
Uh,
We can start with that.
Absolutely. My favorite definition of mindfulness I learned from Hunter Clark Fields, and she describes mindfulness as the intention of putting our attention on the present moment with kindness and curiosity, so that we can make decisions about what to do next. And I love this because of the emphasis on kindness and curiosity, which I
Mhm.
know that for me as a meditator is really easy to forget about.
Yeah.
And as a parent.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's wonderful that this definition actually has those elements in them, because I think that when it comes to long-term change, they really are so incredibly powerful and so incredibly important, but they just are something that we forget about in our daily lives because we're very, very busy. As
Mhm.
far as meditation, I think there's kind of two main things that we can think about. Obviously, it's a practice. It's not the only practice, but I happen to think it's a very good one for practicing in mindfulness, so that we're building these connections in our brains. We're building neural networks so that parenting is a little bit easier, because the pathways of like getting distracted and then coming back to the present moment are already being built up. But the other
Mhm.
thing that I like to point out is that, we have there's this myth out there. I certainly heard it a lot when I was first starting meditation, that meditation is about clearing the mind. And that is not what meditation is about, because it's impossible. The mind exists to think. That is
Yeah.
what it is there for. And so, yes, I mean, through the course of meditation, you do clear the mind in some ways, but the real practice of meditation is about noticing that you're distracted and bringing your attention back to an anchor, which is something in the present moment. So it most commonly is the breath. It might be a sensation in your body. It might be a sound. It just kind of depends and what you've chosen to use, but to bring it back with kindness and curiosity. And we do that over and over again. And it's that actual experience of being distracted and not getting sucked into the storyline, but instead choosing to come back, that is meditation. And it's what prepares us to be more present parents, because that's what we need to do over and over and over again in our interactions with our kids if we're not going to get triggered and act out in some way.
Yeah, yeah, I love that you're touching on that because that was kind of going to be my follow-up question. Like, how does, I think sometimes parents think like, well, why do I have to meditate? That's like eating healthy or having a workout. It's like, yes, it's great preventative stuff, but like, why is it really so important in my parenting? Like, I think it's not as clear for many parents, like the direct correlation of, and you just described it beautifully, kind of in a general way, but maybe you can give an example of like how if push comes to shove, how does this meditation practice actually kick in to help you in the moment?
Yeah. So I think that meditation kind of does two things. One is it does kind of slow us down. So because we have the experience of just sitting still or doing
Mhm.
whatever in a slow way. And that in of itself is incredibly helpful and has been incredibly helpful to me in a culture that tells us to go, 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 and a parenting world that tells us to do, 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 do. And so it gives us that experience of going just a little bit slower. It gets our mind going just a little bit slower so that we can notice when, like, all of a sudden, you're either about to start yelling or you are yelling. And so then you can make the decision to stop. And so, like, I feel like I experience this with my own kids pretty frequently, where like I'll start to get irritated with them. I might end up yelling, or I might just be talking in what my son calls my annoyed voice. But meditation is what helps me notice when my annoyed voice shows up, so
Mhm.
that then I can make a choice to not use my annoyed voice and to even make a repair for having used my annoyed voice and say, you know what, I really shouldn't have been talking like that. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Let's try this again. Or if there's not time to try it again or whatever else, maybe just be like, you know what, really sorry about that. I'm going to work harder on it. Let me reset, try to speak to you in a more normal tone.
Yeah, so I love how you talked about like it helps us slow down time, which is really hard in modern society because it can often, like in a very real way, feel like there's too many things to do and not enough time, and that makes us want to go faster so we can actually get to those things that are expectations. But meditation seems almost like a burden. It's like, well, this is like it's just this resistance to like to do this like accelerated thing. um and so any thoughts around like what parents can kind of do to like reframe that in their minds, because it seems like there's just no possible way to get the things done already without meditating, and now meditation is going to like help you develop something that almost seems counterintuitive to what you're supposed to be doing in modern society. So how do parents kind of sync these up?
Uh-huh.
How do you
This is
reconcile this?
incredibly tough. And I think
Yeah.
there's a few ways that we can look at it. One is through like, how can we rethink the practice of meditation? And like, what are our goals and that sort of thing. But the bigger thing I would actually say is, how can we rethink what it means to show up, and what it means to help our children develop, and what parents really need to do, which is why I love the topic of this summit about intentional parenting, because I'm
Yeah.
very, very big believer that we need to strip away as much as humanly possible. Like, I think that so many parents get weighed down in, what do I do or what do I say in this particular interaction? And this leads to a way of living that has us constantly running and doing and trying to learn new things and thinking that we're less than, that we're not good enough for our kids, and that we don't know what to do, and we need to go to an expert, and we need to do all this stuff. And so what we can do is we can think about how, if we can shift how we're showing up, then those things start to resolve themselves, sometimes very slowly and rarely completely. But what happens is that, our window of tolerance, our ability to be with things that are kind of a little bit nutty, grows. Our children's ability to do that grows, which in turn leads to less meltdowns and challenging behaviors and things like that. So really, yes, there is an investment of time in doing this practice, but it comes back to you in so many ways. Because when you calm your system, because of a process called neuroception, where every nervous system, every human's body is like reading the environment for cues of safety or danger. When you've calmed your nervous system and made it feel safe, your child's nervous system, on a very, very subconscious level, is reading you as safe. And they're going to be a lot less likely to escalate as a result, because they don't have to. We escalate when we don't feel safe and we're in protection. So
Mhm.
it's really just all about shifting how the parent shows up. And then, I would say, as a practical matter, we want to remember, and this is so hard for parents, that you don't have to meditate for huge periods of time. Like, I think a lot of the resistance comes from thinking that you have to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day or something like that.
Mhm.
Like, I recommend to parents 5 minutes. And if 5 minutes is too much, take it back to 3 minutes. I find that most people think like maybe they do that for a week or two, and then they kind of come back to 5 minutes. And over time, maybe they like expand it to 10 minutes because actually there's a lot of really enjoyable stuff once you've gotten into the habit. But recognizing that it's a very small period of time, I think is incredibly helpful. And then the other thing that we can do is really think about how this is not necessarily something that we are adding to our life. It's maybe just changing the way that we're already doing something. So there's a great practice out there called mindfully washing the dishes. So if you do not have a dishwasher, or maybe you have some things that cannot go in the dishwasher, you can, instead of turning on a podcast or watching a TV show or whatever, while you mindlessly, distractedly wash the dishes, you can actually pay incredibly close attention to the process of washing the dishes, the ways that you're moving your hands, the feeling of the soap suds on your hands, the sounds that you hear, all of these things. And that right there is a mindfulness practice. Another thing that I recommend to a lot of my clients who have dogs is that they use their dog walks as glimmer walks. So glimmers are this concept from polyvagal theory. It's basically glimmers are the opposite of triggers. They're things, little things that we see or notice that bring us joy. And so I love the idea of expanding our window of tolerance and expanding our capacity by bringing more attention to the things that bring us joy. And this is one of the few times when multitasking really, really works. You can get your dog outside, you can do the thing that you have to do, and you can actually do something for yourself while you do it.
Yeah, I love that because the dog doesn't necessarily depend on you to be present in the moment and for that connection. They're doing their own thing, and
They're
so you
doing their
can like,
thing.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how so often when parents say that they don't have time to meditate or it's hard to be mindful, I think one of the biggest reasons it's hard for all of us, including parents, is that we're not comfortable sitting with our uncomfortable feelings, because what meditation mindfulness does is it brings you into the present moments in a very real somatic way, and your emotions are in your body, right? And then it's like, ooh, then I'm gonna have to experience these, and that I don't want to do that stuff is
Oh yeah.
not comfortable. Why would I want to suffer? Like, I'm avoiding pain, I'm trying to avoid threat and pain, so why would I go towards something that doesn't feel so good right now? It's easier to turn on the TV and wash the dishes with a distracted mind than to be, wax on, wax off, right? Like Karate Kid.
Yes,
So
yes.
how would you like kind of, any thoughts around then? How do parents help overcome that resistance, even if it's not conscious, it's
Yeah.
subconscious?
Well, yeah, the resistance is so incredibly real. I mean, it is in our body to run away from things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to realize and convince ourselves of is that as we do that, those uncomfortable things remain and they actually get bigger and they become more uncomfortable for us and more difficult. So maybe at first, we're just like, I don't want to deal with this slight feeling of frustration. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to watch TV. But over time, frustration becomes so hard to be with. And I think that as parents, this can become really, really apparent in ways that it never was before, because if we're being like very mindful and paying close attention, we will notice that there's like little feelings that our children have that are extremely uncomfortable for us. So to give an example, I am extremely uncomfortable with my children's sadness. And I started to notice this, like every time they got sad, I had the urge to run in and fix it and make their sadness go away. I did not at first really understand what all was happening in my own body, but like there was definitely this urge to go in and fix it. And so one of the things that I had to do, and one of the biggest things that I recommend to parents, is to work on that by identifying the feelings that you're uncomfortable with and the situations that bring them up, and then meditate on them. And there's a beautiful practice for doing this called RAIN. And it's all about not just acknowledging that we have these big, uncomfortable, inconvenient emotions, but actually welcoming them into our lives. And when we give them space in our lives, they stop fighting so hard. And when they're not fighting so hard, they get smaller and more manageable.
Hmm.
So, I actually, for people who are watching this, there is a mini course that I have for parents all about how to build a meditation practice. Some of it will be things that we've talked about today. A lot of it's different. And one of the things that is included in there is a rain meditation, because I really do think that it is the most powerful thing for parents. Because as we get more comfortable with these things, then it's going to make meditating of the, more normal variety, where we just sit in silence or wash dishes and notice things really carefully, a lot easier, because we have more capacity, more
Mhm.
ability to be with those uncomfortable feelings.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I love that. So the goal is to invite and welcome these uncomfortable feelings, and really not even just uncomfortable, even delightful, pleasant feelings. Because sometimes people
It
will
can
brush that off
absolutely.
too. Like they could be like
Delightful, pleasant
resisting
feelings are
joy.
very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah,
We don't
exactly.
think they would be, but they are.
Yeah, right. Right. It's like, I don't deserve this. I don't know how to be with this. And then they resist it and they turn into some suffering when they have an opportunity to be delighted or enjoy something, but they resist it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess what I wanted to just kind of highlight how if we welcome this, so back to intentional parenting. If the idea of intentional parenting, as you mentioned briefly, is to you don't have to do everything, but you should do the things you want to prioritize the things that are most like important to you and your family values and things like that to be able to get to that like top priority list of because you don't have time to do everything, but you do have time to do some things. How are you going to choose that? If we're able to meditate or be mindful prior to beginning this like day, right? It helps us kind of sort through all these emotions we're experiencing that are kind of like getting in the way of thinking clearly and intentionally. Would you say that that's kind of practice, or is it more like would you be want to be intentional first before you're mindful and meditate in order to like
Yeah.
help reprioritize your list so that you don't feel so overwhelmed and like you confused and in the muck, like you don't know where you're going, you're just swimming in the muck. Like how
Yeah.
to get that clarity that of how you want to show up with intention.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both, but the one that I think is probably most helpful because it is so contrary to the way most of us are thinking at the moment is the latter. So, what I like to do when I'm thinking about, intentional parenting and what kids really need is I try to distill it down to the lowest level. And my ideas on this are really based on kind of the work of Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne Bryson, and specifically their book, The Power of Showing Up, and the work of Dr. Gordon Neufeld. And you can combine these in a really great way to sort of understand what is it that kids really need. So if we want to support our children to grow into healthy adults who have they're resilient and they have high levels of emotional intelligence and ability to regulate their emotions and all of these things, they need to be able to rest in our care so that they can grow. And the way they rest in our care is through what's often referred to as secure attachment, and which Doctors Siegel and Bryson spell out as being they need to feel safe, seen, and secure. And meditation helps with all of these things. Like when parents meditate, because of that process of neuroception, and also because of the way that it changes how we show up and interact with our kids, then what happens is that is really when we do that, we are laying the framework and we are doing the single most important thing for them. So all of that other stuff that we think about doing becomes an extra.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those extras are pretty important because they're about our values and everything else. Some of those extras, we later realize they're nice to have, sure, but they're not the thing to do when, it feels like you only have 10 minutes a day with your kids or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it really helps us to sort of helps us if we first narrow in on what's really important. And then once we've done that, then we see how much we can add, and we can use that other idea that you were talking about to decide what to add on.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. So understanding like the child development needs. What does a child need for optimal brain development, which is that framework of secure attachment. And that's always kind of like your, if you're going to do anything today, focus on secure attachment, right? That's like
Yeah.
the most intentional thing you should choose. And then anything else like, right, like these other things. Like roughhousing or like special time or whatever, are kind
Yeah.
of like icing on the cake. And sometimes they're one and the same, but not
Sometimes
always, right?
they do become the same. I mean, I was
Yeah.
talking earlier about how you can sort of double up your practices, like this idea of the glimmer walk while you're taking your dog out. Another example could be using special time as a very mindful living opportunity, not unlike the mindfully washing the dishes. It just happens to
Hmm.
be a little bit harder, I think, for us because our kid is right there and they are demanding in some way for us. It's like we have such a strong desire to engage it's really hard to break that and just watch your child and delight in them. So that's why I think having other practices, whether they're meditation or there's some of these other things like the daily mindfulness activities, to sort of start training your brain, makes it easier to then do these things with your child.
Yeah, I think many parents can relate to the fact that it can be really hard to play with kids if that's not what you're used to. It's not like to start a practice of like regularly playing with your kids and just delighting in them. It can be really hard because, like you said, it's an exercise in mindfulness and it's like a stretch goal.
It is
We're only
very much
really
a stretch.
mindful. Yeah, we're only
But
mindful
we're
so
but
much of the
we're
time,
yet
right?
taught that it's not, so that we should just be able to do it
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
ways.
Right.
And we might have to just push through in at times, but it makes complete and total sense that it's not so easy to do.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's a lot of feelings that come up for us because it's like that mindfulness we're sitting with now, our own emotions that are coming up. And if this is the first time we're trying to do that outside of our own meditation practice, it can feel overwhelming. And so you mentioned it'd be really good before parents kind of tackle these stretch goals, um, to practice some other like less intense. So as we know that the learning zones of how we learn, we don't want to go into overwhelm. We want to stay in like
Mhm.
gently pushing ourselves, but not in the completely safe and relaxed where we're just not even stretching, right? So we want to grow, but not into the zone of overwhelm. So what would be some examples, some more, I know you gave a few examples, any other kind of like, as you think about like a parent's routine with kids around, maybe
Mhm.
particularly with kids, because, we all have our own to-do list if we're not with our children, but maybe if we do spend a huge chunk of our day with our kids, how can we incorporate more mindfulness that doesn't necessarily require us to be present with the child, but maybe around them, into our day?
Yeah, well, so one thing that you can do is, it's if you are spending that entire day with your kids, maybe you're spending probably not all of it, but a large portion of it in the house, you can take time, maybe do it at night when your kids are asleep, to go around the house and find anchors in every room. So, like a little thing that you can look at that's going to bring you back to the present moment. I
Mhm.
especially like if these are things that bring a small smile to your face, because the more that we can bring play and joy into our own lives as adults, the easier it's going to be to play with our kids. You mentioned how hard it is for parents, for many parents, to play with their kids. It doesn't feel comfortable. And very often that's because we don't have enough play and joy in our life.
Mhm.
So if
Mhm.
we can bring those little things into our lives, that's so much better. Like I love to leave like little like rocks or things to smell at different places around the house so that I can reach for them, both to bring myself back into the present moment and also to like bring a little bit of joy into my life. So that kind of thing is
Mhm.
extremely important. You can definitely savoring meals is a good one. Even I would say like, we talk sometimes about like slowing down the breath, but how can you actually do that as a deliberate, enjoyable practice? Like, so rather than just being like, oh, I'm starting to get irritated, I'm going to take a nice breath in and then a longer exhale out because that's how I stimulate the vagus nerve, which is all scientifically accurate. How can I actually enjoy that process as a way to nurture myself?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the sort of, it's a bit of a mindset shift that then leads into little practices that we can sprinkle into our day if we're staying at home with our kids all day. If maybe we're not staying at home with our kids all day, maybe they're in school. We can also look at little things like how can I integrate resets into my life? So the sort of typical way of meditating is to meditate first thing in the morning. I don't do that because I want a midday reset. I do my
Mm-hmm.
meditation at around 11 o'clock. Many
Mm-hmm.
of my clients do their meditation in the pickup line at school so that they are refreshed when their child comes out. Or maybe that's not their primary meditation of the day, but you're sitting there anyway, so they turn on something inspirational to listen to so that they have that little reset. So there, so I think that's another really important thing that we can do that's really helpful is just look at the patterns in our day. It's not triggers exactly. It's just like what kinds of things happen that make us a little bit less likely to be able to stay present, and what small thing can we add that's not going to feel like too much? Because you're absolutely right,
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to do too much, but what's the small little thing that we can add that's going to help comfort us through that? And then, the other thing that I would say when you are spending a lot of time with your kids is getting really good at different sorts of self-compassion breaks and maybe subtle ways of offering yourself self-compassion, which is really, really helpful. So, yes, self-compassion can be a different practice than meditation, which can have like a much more of a grounding effect. But there's also a similarity between the two in that self-compassion is what opens us up to ground and to orient to our space a lot of the time. And then also the more that we're grounded and oriented and in the present moment, the easier it's going to be to practice self-compassion. So they're kind of going back and forth. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're spending all day with your kids, like just kind of reminding yourself that you're here to support yourself, being kind to yourself, recognizing that, yeah, like being with little kids all day is really, really hard. Just saying those things to yourself over and over again is really helpful. Occasionally I don't do it a lot with my kids, but I will sometimes when things are particularly hard, like put a hand on the heart or something like that. Something I do more often is soothing self-touch by rubbing my arm. So that's something, you can do it if, let's say that you do work in a traditional environment. No one seems to do that anymore, but let's say you do and you go to meetings a lot. That you can have your arm under the table and just kind of rub it. I do it at dinner time, or when we're sitting at the table playing games or whatever, like, or yesterday, my son and I were doing some homework together and he was starting to get frustrated. And so, I was sitting there with my arm under the table, rubbing it and repeating these self-compassion phrases to myself to help get myself through that. Because as you've pointed out so many times, there are all of these really uncomfortable emotions that come up in us when our kids are having a hard time. And so we always want to be looking for little ways that we can soothe the part of ourself that is getting uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love this. I love the integration throughout the day, whether you're with your kids or alone. Um, it's like, first of all, like permission to actually do this. You have permission to be kind to yourself. If your goal is to become an intentional parent and more mindful, you must give yourself permission, right? And you have our permission, right? For everybody listening, because there's no way you can be intentional with your kids if you're not intentionally kind to yourself, right? If you don't meet your own needs, like you can't just tough it out. You'll run out of steam and you won't
Well,
end up being intentional in your life or your parenting if you don't turn towards yourself every so often, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. We give so much, and um, it's really important, I like this, you talked about having permission to do these things. And I think we also want to remember that like while it is true that our kids are often the downstream beneficiaries of this stuff, like we deserve to feel good. Like, yes, it helps me stay present with my child when he's having a hard time if I offer myself self-compassion, but also it just makes me feel better during a tough time. And that is perfectly legitimate, even if
Yeah.
my son then spirals out of control.
Yeah, and I think
Experience
that's a hard
don't
one
happen one
to,
way, but yeah, but it's totally valid because I deserve it.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a journey to get to that point where we feel like we deserve it.
Oh
I
yeah.
think so often, like, our own childhoods were with like this tone of like, you don't deserve it necessarily, maybe. And maybe it wasn't role modeled, like our parents didn't treat themselves like this. So who's the role model, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um what are we who are we learning from? And now
Yeah.
it's like
No.
there's a different way, like maybe your parents weren't actually intentional parenting, like maybe they weren't as mindful as you want to be. So if you want to be something different, you're going to have to do something different. Like you can't get the same results from the you can't get different results doing the same thing, right? So if you want to
Absolutely.
show up differently, you have to do something different, and even if it feels uncomfortable to start.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's why practices such as rain that help us to invite things in are so important. And the other thing that, like the rain meditation that comes with my mini course does is it talks specifically about not just welcoming the emotions, but caring for them. And I think that that really helps us on this journey of thinking that we deserve it too, even if we weren't raised to think that we deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's just something about the process of always of not just welcoming the emotions, accepting them into your life, and then loving yourself through them that slowly over time will start to seep out into greater feelings of worthiness overall and deserving all of this stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, I love that you're touching on the resource. We'll definitely have it linked below. I don't know if you want to say anything else on it, but everyone can access this as a free resource.
Yeah, no, so it's a very short mini course. It's about 5 days long, videos of like 3 to 5 minutes on all of the basics, why parents need meditation. There's actually some stuff about how it changes the brain that we didn't get into today.
Mhm.
When do you meditate? Where do you meditate? How long do you meditate for? All of this stuff. And then how, once you've kind of got the basic practice laid, do you grow your meditation practice? And that's where these things come in, like, for example, doing rain. I wouldn't necessarily start with it, even though I think it's like an amazing practice, just because we need to like develop other skills of like having a place and everything else. And a lot of times that's just easier with like really short meditations. Rain meditation tends to be a
Mhm.
little bit longer. But what we can do is we can like sort of like have that schedule or practice or whatever of these shorter things. And then sort of drop in these longer things that work on very specific things, such as rain and welcoming in different emotions. So we talk about some of those different practices and how you might build a special practice around different things and a schedule around different practices in the last day.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I know this has been a great, not even just an introduction, more than an introduction. I feel like we covered some more in-depth content, I think, that might, will really be helpful to our audience. And I really appreciate you coming on here to share with us today, Heidi.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everyone who's listening to this. Like, this is really, really helpful for your parenting and more importantly, for you and your kids.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.